I would say the hardest part of dealing with COVID has been like a mental battle, understanding that so many people are going through something literally all together, and so many people being like the entire
The
earth.
most difficult aspect has been the lack of connectivity. And at the beginning, there was excitement at the prospect of missing school on the part of the boys. But then suddenly a month passes and you hear more echoes of wanting to return to campus.
The hardest part of COVID for me was not being able to hang out with my friends and having to readjust to all the protocols that we had to follow.
The hardest part of COVID for me was the isolation. So I miss being with people, going to dinner, walks, simple things.
The best part about COVID has been how God has covered me, how He's continued to be faithful.
I had the opportunity to grow a lot spiritually and mentally.
The easiest part in terms of being a teacher was the convenience. I'd get up, make my Cuban coffee, turn on Zoom, and I was ready to teach.
Has actually been a lot of growth. I tried to be mindful. I tried to spend time on things I often don't have time for.
And I've changed because I've learned to be present and not take things for granted, even if it's just the little life things.
The in-person interaction. And we are social beings and we long for connection. And once it's removed, you realize how many times you took for granted something that is so inherent in us.
So because of COVID, I feel happier because I had the chance to do a lot of personal work. So I got to spend time on things that sometimes give me anxiety or down feelings. And so I feel like COVID gave me space. COVID slowed my life down, slowed me down.
Hi, I'm Tova with Wellspring Counseling, and I'm wondering what your COVID story is today. Are you adjusting to these changes of COVID, and especially with school starting? How are you doing? Does your COVID story feel like it's just beginning, or you're in the middle of it and you have a long way to go, or maybe you're just starting the new after COVID part of your story of your life? So one thing I want to encourage you is to tell your whole story, because that's what emotional athletes do. They develop resilience by telling their story over and over as they go through their stories. So how do you tell your story? First of all, tell it to other people. Put it to words, and in the process, you'll be forced to clarify what was important, what happened, what you feel, how it impacted you. And then when we do that with witnesses who listen to us, it makes the story more real, and we can feel really validated. Second, you have to choose what you're going to focus on. By having to put it to words, you have to say what you include and what you don't. You have to make a decision. So I want to ask you, when you tell your COVID story, do you only tell the hard parts and kind of get stuck in the misery? Or do you ignore the hard parts and kind of deny that you had that pain? And then you miss the opportunity to find healing with other people and to join the humble humanity that we all live in. People who are emotional athletes work hard to notice all the good and the bad elements of their stories, the truth in the whole thing. And we call this reframing a situation. It's where you put a frame around a picture and that makes you focus on key parts. Well, if you crop your picture down to a tiny little part, you don't really have a good view of the whole thing. Emotional athletes try to include every truth that's related to it. They put a big frame on the picture so that they can see the whole thing. And then third, keep writing your endings. If you don't have good listeners, then you may get interrupted and never get to tell your ending. But try to tell it to yourself at least. We need conclusions. It's like being in a movie that gets cut halfway through and you're left with angst and anxiety and it's a cliffhanger because you don't know what happened. Well, we can do that in our own lives by not finishing our stories. So give yourself permission to tell the story all the way through to conclusion, or you end it with something like, and now I'm wiser or stronger or better, or God did this in my life, or I'm going to get through this in a better way. So we know that as Christians, all of our stories have happy endings, eventually in God's time. Listen to this, Philippians 1:6. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. Or Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. God's going to finish his work in you. He's going to complete what he started. He has good plans for you. You need to be able to come up with conclusions that include that. If we can't see it, we can't be it. So it's very important that we envision our victories in life by writing conclusions. All right, so what's your COVID story today? Who are you going to tell? What's the good? What's the bad? And what are your conclusions? And if you're not sure of your conclusions, try on some of these. Tell your story.